Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special edition of 3 News Now, where we're bringing you the latest updates after the return of the verdict in the Derek Chauvin murder trial. Late this afternoon, the jury did return the verdict of guilty on all 3 charges that Derek Chauvin faced for the killing of George Floyd. Those charges were second-degree murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter. George Floyd was killed on May 25th when we saw police body camera footage and bystander video showing Derek Chauvin kneeling on Floyd's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. The 12 jurors who were responsible for deciding this case deliberated for about 4 hours on Monday before taking a break at 8 p.m., coming back at 8 a.m. this morning Central Time, and we got word at around 2:30 p.m. from the Minnesota Judicial Branch that a verdict had been reached. So based on that timeline, the jury deliberated for just over 10 hours. After the news was released, there was reaction, of course, from across the community, of course, in Minneapolis, also here in Northeast Ohio. We'll tell you what some of that was. Reverend Al Sharpton spoke, and he said that he was with the attorney Ben Crump and George Floyd's family, and that they broke down in tears when the verdict was read, saying that this was for everyone who didn't get justice, naming people who have been harmed at the hands of police, specifically naming Breonna Taylor, and also calling out Breonna Taylor's boyfriend who was there. And then Reverend Sharpton went to lead a prayer and calling Ben Crump, the attorney for George Floyd's family, the attorney general for Black America. Joe Biden said that he had prayed for the right verdict in the Chauvin trial previously today, and President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris called the Floyd family after the verdict. We saw that on live news today. He thanked them all for making it through this and being advocates for justice. Vice President Harris said that something good will come out of this tragedy, and President Biden promised the family that he would put them on Air Force One and get them to the White House. Earlier today, President Biden said that he called Floyd's family on Monday to offer prayers and that he could only imagine the pressure and the anxiety that they were feeling leading up to awaiting that return of the verdict from the jury. Again, no one had any idea that that would come today. And it did come today. As we said, we got word that it was coming at around 2:30 p.m. and then that was read this evening at around 5 p.m. Eastern. And we do know that President Biden and Vice President Harris are expected to speak later tonight. Here in Northeast Ohio, the attorney for Tamir Rice's family reacted to the guilty verdict. Subodh Chandra is the attorney who represented the family of Tamir Rice. As a reminder, that's the 12-year-old boy who was fatally shot by Cleveland police here in November of 2014. That officer, Timothy Lehman, who was later fired, it was found out, for lying on documentation, not charged for the killing of Tamir Rice. Chandra said that the verdict isn't a surprise because the evidence was so overwhelming of Derek Chauvin's guilt. He says what is a pleasant surprise is that in this limited instance, we've seen our system work in police accountability. He did go on to say there's so many other instances where it hasn't, referring to police accountability, that it raises fundamental questions about how much overwhelming force does it take in a courtroom before 12 jurors will finally find a police officer guilty of misconduct, or for prosecutors to even seek an indictment, which has been a serious problem in police accountability cases. That's a direct quote from Chandra. Now, last month, Chandra announced that the Rice family is asking the U.S. Department of Justice to open an investigation into Tamir's death, to reopen an investigation that was closed by the previous administration. As a reminder, Tamir was shot after police received a call about a, quote, guy with a pistol outside of a Cleveland recreation center. He'd been playing outside with a pellet gun. Officers said they didn't know that he was a child and that he was playing with a toy before he was fatally shot twice. And again, no officers were charged in that case. Now, here across Northeast Ohio, it took moments for community leaders to react after the guilty verdicts were handed out and that news broke. And there was an overwhelming sense of relief from Northeast Ohio leaders, but also an acknowledgement that there is a lot of work to do. Democrats and Republicans alike shared support for that verdict. Ohio's U.S. Representative Joyce Beatty tweeted that she was relieved and that the guilty verdicts showed that justice had prevailed here, but that's not always the case. She went on to name many people who did not see justice after being killed at the hands of police. She named Breonna Taylor, Daunte Wright, who was just recently shot in the Minneapolis area, Adam Toledo, Andre Hill, Casey Goodson Jr., Tamir Rice, and she said George Floyd. All of these people should be alive, and no verdict will bring them back or undo the unimaginable heartache and loss their family, friends, and our communities have had to endure. Those are words from Representative Beatty. She did say, though, that she is hopeful that this is a turning point to inspire action, quote, because the American people are demanding transparency, accountability, and equal justice. And she also called on Congress to pass the George Floyd Justice in Policing Act, which is something that many people are talking about today, and hoping that that will get the support that it needs to be passed in Congress and signed into law by President Biden. State Senator Sandra Williams, who's a Democrat representing Cleveland, also released a statement today. She said today's verdict in the Chauvin trial is a bittersweet moment in the name of justice for George Floyd's family and community. She said, despite the jury decision, we must continue to peel back the injustices in our criminal justice system and how we police in communities. She said, make no mistake, George Floyd should be alive. His life was taken far too soon from authorities who are sworn to protect him. That was another sentiment that continued to be echoed by leaders today. George Floyd should be alive. Republican U.S. Senator for Ohio Rob Portman said this. He said George Floyd's death was tragic and should never happen to anyone in America. He says he's grateful today that justice appears to be served while we await sentencing. Another Republican U.S. Representative for Ohio, Dave Joyce, said as a former prosecutor, he's got great respect for the rule of law, due process, and our nation's judicial system. Today, that system delivered justice for the murder of George Floyd. I thank the jurors for their service and continue to pray for the Floyd family. Now, of course, athletes have been very outspoken about social justice, about police brutality, and LeBron James is no exception. He's been a leader in that space, and he tweeted simply the word accountability today. His former teammate, Kevin Love, tweeted justice with raised fists in every color that emojis will let you post on social media. He tweeted that out. And the Cavaliers released this statement. They said, horrific images of George Floyd's murder still ring true and clear in our minds. And today's verdict represents an important measure of justice for him and his family. We will continue our deep desire and commitment to see and support equality, compassion, respect, unity, healing, and peace for all, especially in moments when it might be most difficult to achieve. Now, of course, Minnesota leaders spoke out as well. Governor Tim Walz, the governor for Minnesota, Attorney General Keith Ellison, and the family of George Floyd held those press conferences after the verdict came down. Governor Tim Walz called this an important step for justice in Minnesota. He said the trial is over, but our work has only begun, again saying no verdict can bring George back. He said true justice for George only comes through real systemic change to prevent this from happening again. And the tragic death of Daunte Wright this week serves as a heartbreaking reminder that we still have so much work to do here. Attorney General Keith Ellison brought that up, saying again, there is so much work to be done, referencing there's another case to come. He said he wouldn't talk about that now, clearly referring to the killing of Daunte Wright, who was killed seemingly, according to the now resigned police chief for Brooklyn Center, when former officer Kim Potter pulled out her gun and appeared, according to what the officer said, according to what the police chief said, to have intended to pull out her taser and then fatally shot 20-year-old Daunte Wright as he was pulled over for a traffic violation. Attorney General Ellison went on to say that no one can do everything, but everyone can do something, and again referenced that George Floyd Justice and Accountability Act. Now, here in Northeast Ohio, here's something important for people to know. People were not sure which way the verdict was going to go, and the city was prepared if there were to be protests, which there have been peaceful public gatherings. We saw some of that in Public Square today, and you can see some of that on WKYC.com. But in the event that there had been protests that did turn to violence, the COVID-19 mass vaccination site at the Wolstein Center at Cleveland State, that has been closed for the night out of an abundance of caution. So they said that they'll be contacting people who had appointments on Tuesday night to reschedule. And if you do need help rescheduling, you can also call 1-866-982-1979 to reschedule an appointment there or at an alternate location. Now that brings us to the question looking forward. How long will Derek Chauvin go to prison for George Floyd's murder? Well, the maximum sentence that Chauvin could face is 40 years for the second-degree murder charge, 25 years for the third-degree murder charge, and 10 years for the second-degree manslaughter charge. Now, it's possible to serve those back-to-back. It's possible, but it's not likely. It's much more likely they'd be served at the same time because they are all for the same crime. And under the Minneapolis sentencing system, there are presumptive sentences that are 12 and a half years for each murder charge and 4 years for the manslaughter charge. Now, this is for a person with no criminal record. The judge could, however, consider a heavier sentence. This is based on a motion from the prosecution and other information discovered during what's called the pre-sentence investigation. This is the phase that the court enters now. This is like a background check for Chauvin. In this period, other factors can be gathered to help the judge determine the length of the sentence that is appropriate in this situation. Now, Chauvin waived his right to have a jury decide whether anything discovered is enough to justify a longer sentence, and instead chose to have Judge Cahill make that decision on his own. So without aggravating factors, the judge could use his discretion to hand down a sentence as short as 10 years and 8 months, or as long as 15 years on the murder charges, and anywhere from 3 years and 5 months to 4 years and 9 months for the manslaughter charge. Now, again, most likely we are looking at just the longer charge here, as these most likely would be served at the same time and not back to back. However, the judge could consider a heavier sentence up to a maximum of 40 years on that main charge based on the prosecution's motion. One aggravating factor the judge could consider is that there was a 9-year-old child who witnessed the murder. But this is not over at the sentencing phase. We do need to look forward because an appeal in this case is practically certain. The issues that Chauvin's lawyers might appeal are a little bit more of an open question, but the most likely issue for appeal is the massive publicity that there was in this case, and the judge denied repeated requests from Chauvin's defense team, led by defense attorney Eric Nelson, to move the case out of Minneapolis or sequester the jury throughout the trial to try and keep them from any and all news or mentions of the case. Now, these requests were denied at the beginning of the trial and throughout the trial, particularly after that fatal shooting of Daunte Wright, just 10 miles from where the Chauvin trial was being held. Now, and also denied again after comments made by U.S. Representative Maxine Waters demanding a guilty verdict. Another possible issue for appeal, that third-degree murder charge. If you remember back to the beginning of the Chauvin trial, there was a debate over whether that would even be included. The defense attorney will likely challenge that Chauvin can't be convicted on that count because the way the statute is read in Minnesota, some attorneys and judges have read it to mean that it can only apply if you are putting multiple people at risk, not just one person, in this case, George Floyd. However, Cahill did initially side with that interpretation of the defense, but then after the appellate court ruled, which came on the third day of Chauvin's jury selection, he said he agreed that there was a case of another officer, Mohammed Noor, who was charged in 2017 with killing Australian-American Justine Ruxick, that was immediate precedent, and then reinstated that third-degree murder charge against Chauvin. So that's a possible issue for appeal. Those are just two possibilities for appeal. So keep that in mind. This is not quite over yet, but many people are celebrating that Derek Chauvin was found guilty on all of those 3 charges today. That's it for this special edition of 3 News Now. After the verdict has been handed down in the Derek Chauvin murder trial for the killing of George Floyd, I'm Stephanie Haney.